pile of keys sitting there. And I said, because
Why, Adam?
I knew at that point that I made a mistake.
Okay.
Is there anything, Brett, that you feel like you did wrong on March 13th at 3003 Springfield Drive?
Absolutely not. In a shooting stance at the ready here, and it lit up that figure. So if I'm you, or I'm where you're at, I see the muzzle flash, I get illumination from that muzzle flash.
Beneath the badge and uniform, some officers carried not honor, but horror. From Adam Coy's cold-blooded shootings to Michael Vagnini's cunning power plays, these aren't just bad cops. They're deadly, and their cases reveal criminals hiding in plain sight. Let's begin.
Appealing the ruling, not just for myself, but for everyone in the law enforcement community, doing a complicated, dangerous, ever-changing job in a world of policing.
On December 22, 2020, Columbus, Ohio, it was shortly after 1:45 a.m. when Officer Adam Coy responded to a non-emergency call. A neighbor had reported seeing someone sitting in an SUV, turning it on and off. At first, it seemed like a minor concern. That person was a 47-year-old Andre Hill. He had just stepped out of a friend's home, holding his phone. What happened next would be a heartbreaking and life-changing moment. Officer Coy and his partner, Officer Amy Detweiler, arrived on Oberlin Drive. Body camera footage shows Officer Coy walking toward Andre. Within seconds, Coy fired several shots. 3 hit Andre's leg, and 1 struck his chest. Andre didn't have the opportunity to say anything or explain himself. He was not holding a weapon, only his smartphone. Even more heartbreaking, officers did not provide medical assistance immediately. For 10 minutes, Andre lay on the ground in pain. Instead of helping, officers handcuffed him as he was seriously injured. The incident was recorded by Coy's body camera only because of a special 60-second automatic feature. He had not turned the camera on himself. The footage caused widespread concern in the community.
Adam Coy.
Yes.
Was it fair to say he was upset?
Yes.
Describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you saw when you guys realized there was no weapon.
This was not the first complaint against Officer Coy. Over nearly 2 decades on the force, he had received more than 90 citizen complaints. Despite this history, he continued to work as an officer until this incident. Just 6 days after the shooting, he was removed from his position. On February 3, 2021, Adam Coy was officially charged with murder, felonious assault, and dereliction of duty. Later, more charges were added, including reckless homicide. However, the legal process moved slowly. The trial was postponed several times, first due to a medical procedure, and then because of Coy's health condition. Finally, in October 2024, nearly 4 years after Andre's death, the trial began. On November 4, 2024, the jury delivered its decision. Coy was found guilty on all charges. There was no threat, no weapon. Andre Hill had simply been walking outside. Why Officer Coy chose to use force is a question that continues to weigh heavily on this case. Some believe it was a reaction based on fear. Others think it was a result of past behavior that was never properly addressed. Whatever the cause, the outcome was the same. A man lost his life far too soon. On July 28, 2025, Officer Adam Coy was sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole after 15 years. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read, and is now officially listed as a violent offender. The judge rejected any attempts to seek a new trial. Although Coy intends to appeal, the legal system has reached its decision.
It's a life sentence, 15 years, 20 years. It will not change the fact or bring him back.
Andre Hill's family remembers him as a kind-hearted father, a proud grandfather, and someone who believed in fairness and progress. Our next case involves a former cop who didn't pull the trigger in the line of duty. He pulled it on his wife.
You pulled that trigger. Your fingers of hate have touched many.
It was a calm Monday in Coleraine Township, Ohio, but what happened that day would shock the entire neighborhood. A retired police officer, known to many as peaceful and professional, would make a chilling call that changed everything. Around emergency dispatchers, strange calls come in all the time. but nothing could prepare one dispatcher for the moment Jeffrey Hawkins called in and calmly said, "I just shot and killed my wife." His voice was steady, no panic, no shouting. He even spelled out his name, and when the dispatcher asked again, just to confirm what she heard, he repeated that yes, he had shot his wife. Jeffrey said he wasn't a threat to anyone and added something else. "I'm a former police officer. I'm not sure what happened." Officers rushed to the home in the quiet Cincinnati suburb, and just like that, Jeffrey surrendered peacefully. Inside, they found 59-year-old Joanne Hawkins, his wife, shot multiple times. Investigators learned the couple had been fighting about money, and that wasn't new. Joanne's sons later told the media that they had long suspected emotional mistreatment in the home. One son said, "We've been scared. We know what he's capable of." Police also discovered this wasn't the first time they had been called to the Hawkins residence, although details of the earlier incident weren't shared. And in court, it came to light that Jeffrey had been charged with battery before.
Slashed her tires, and she told neighbors if they heard gunshots to call the police. We spoke to her two sons. They say they suspected domestic abuse.
Despite being a former cop, Jeffrey's crime wasn't handled lightly. During his court appearance, he was formally charged with murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The judge, noting past charges, refused to lower his bail. It was set at a staggering $3 million. At the time of sentencing, he said,
"There's nothing this court can impose upon me is worse than what I carry with me every day."
A mix of money troubles, rising tension, and unspoken mistreatment in the home. Jeffrey claimed confusion during the call. He said he didn't know what happened, but his actions were clear and deadly. His calm emergency call hid the reality of a sorrowful, irreversible crime. The community was shocked. The family was devastated. Jeffrey Hawkins' sons heartbreakingly lost their mother, taken by someone they feared, but she trusted. Our next case takes us to a chilling night where a woman was killed in the one place she felt safe.
They were being executed with this rifle.
Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old dedicated emergency room technician, was asleep beside her boyfriend when police entered their home unannounced, executing a no-knock search warrant. That night ignited national outrage and exposed a painful truth. Someone needed to be held accountable for what happened. The raid was intended to target a suspected substance operation, but the man police were searching for no longer lived at Breonna's address. Her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, believed intruders were breaking in and fired a single shot in self-defense. In response, police fired 32 bullets into the apartment. Breonna was struck multiple times and tragically died in the hallway. Amid the chaos, bullets also hit a neighboring apartment where a pregnant woman, a 5-year-old child, and a man were sleeping. As months went by, public pressure intensified. Breonna Taylor's name echoed across the nation during peaceful protests and marches, demanding justice. Yet no officer was initially charged with her death. Eventually, there was a step forward. In November 2024, former officer Brett Hankinson was convicted, not for killing Breonna, but for recklessly firing into her apartment and endangering the lives of others. A jury found that Hankinson had violated her civil rights by using excessive force. During sentencing, emotions filled the courtroom. Although the charge carried the eligibility of a life sentence, Hankinson was sentenced to just 33 months, slightly under 3 years. As the verdict was announced, he became visibly emotional. Hankinson's bullets did not cause Breonna's death.
He has been trained by their team, by his legal team, and I think that it is on purpose, but I don't think it's for a good purpose.
They showed the careless and dangerous nature of the raid. In court, Hankinson claimed he fired his weapon to protect his fellow officers. However, prosecutors emphasized that he violated a fundamental rule of using deadly force. Officers are not allowed to shoot unless they can see the person they're targeting. While Hankinson's bullets did not directly cause Breonna Taylor's death, they highlighted the reckless and dangerous conduct of the entire raid. In the end, former officer Brett Hankinson was the only one convicted in connection with the case. Breonna's mother, Tamika Palmer, acknowledged that the judge did the best she could with what was available. Still, the family strongly criticized prosecutors for requesting a lenient sentence. Brianna's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, described the outcome as just a small piece of justice.
3 months in prison, followed by a term of 3 years of supervised release.
Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered, chanting Brianna's name with strength and determination. During the peaceful protest, her aunt was taken into custody. Across the country, people paused to reflect on a painful reality. Justice can feel far away when a life as full of promise as Brianna's is lost so suddenly and unfairly. Our next case involves an officer who crossed the line, turning simple traffic stops into terrifying ordeals.
Lasting damage to his fellow officers, to his police department, to the criminal justice system, and most importantly, to the community.
It all began in Milwaukee, a city where people trusted the police to protect their rights and keep their neighborhoods safe. But that trust was broken when Officer Michael Vagnini was accused of serious misconduct. He wasn't just writing tickets or making arrests. What he did shocked the entire community and led to one of the most disturbing cases in the city's police history. Michael Vagnini was accused of conducting illegal strip searches and invasive body cavity searches on several men during routine traffic stops. These were not simple pat-downs. According to the complaints, he went far beyond the law, performing searches without warrants and medical supervision. The victims, many of them young men, said they felt scared and mistreated.
He pulled out my pants, touched my testicles. They eased down and they put their hands right between my butt. He pulled my drawers down and dug in my.
Some of the searches even took place inside the police station, where people are supposed to feel safe. As the complaints increased, the Milwaukee Police Department launched a full investigation. It turned out that Vagnini was not the only one involved. 3 other officers, Jeffrey Dollop, Brian Kozolek, and Jacob Knight, were also named in the case. The investigation revealed a troubling pattern. Officers were stopping people, claimed they suspected substance possession, and then searching them in ways that both broke the law and basic human rights. The case gained attention across the state, and prosecutors began building charges. Eventually, Michael Vagnini agreed to a plea deal. As part of the deal, an assault charge was dropped, and he would not have to register as an offender. However, the consequences were still serious. On June 21st, he was sentenced to 26 months in prison and 34 months of extended supervision. However, he showed no regret for his actions. The court also made it clear that he would never be allowed to work as a police officer again. While Vagnini never gave a clear reason for his actions, some believed he was acting out of a need for control. Others said he was simply trying to catch people with substances, even if it meant ignoring the law. But no matter the motive, his actions caused real harm to innocent people who had done nothing wrong.
And appreciate from a jury's standpoint of having to separate all those things out, that there could be an argument of prejudice for the other 3 officers.
After the sentencing, Milwaukee Police Chief Ed Flynn released a statement saying that the department must hold itself to the highest standards. He reminded the public that police cannot break the law in the name of enforcing it. The department promised to rebuild the trust that had been lost. Changes were made within the force, and the case became a reminder of the importance of accountability. For the victims, this was not just about a criminal case. It was about losing their sense of safety and dignity. Many said they were left feeling powerless, hurt and afraid of the very people meant to protect them. Even though Vagnini went to prison, the emotional pain he caused would take much longer to heal. Our next case shows how a deadly mistake turned into a lifetime of grief for innocent families.
Or harming anyone. Every day and night, I pray for the victims and their family.
On a quiet night in Albuquerque, New Mexico, May 1st, 2021, what started as a normal drive for 3 men turned into a life-shattering tragedy. The driver responsible was a man who had once taken an oath to protect lives, former Cuba police officer Brandon Barber. Barber wasn't on duty that night, but he was behind the wheel and he was drunk. Police reported that he was driving the wrong way on the highway when he crashed head-on into an SUV near Tramway. Inside that SUV were 21-year-old Diego Arellano, his older brother Fernando, and 50-year-old Alfredo Escaname Hernandez. Diego and Alfredo were pronounced dead on the spot, while Fernando survived with serious, life-changing injuries. As the investigation continued, It was revealed that this wasn't Barber's first encounter with impaired driving. Back in 2016, he had already been arrested for DWI. He completed the first offender program, which included probation, the installation of an ignition interlock device in his car, regular testing, community service, and a hefty fine. But despite those consequences, it was clear that the lesson hadn't truly been learned. Brandon Barber eventually pleaded guilty in court to 2 counts of DWI homicide, 1 count of great bodily harm by vehicle, and 1 count of driving with an open container. Standing before the judge, he said, "I take full responsibility and I bear much guilt." But no amount of regret could undo the tragedy. 2 lives were lost, and the families were left with heartbreak that would last a lifetime. In 2023, Judge Stanley Whitaker sentenced Brandon Barber to 26 years in prison. He also added 5 years of probation. At the time of sentencing, Brandon said, "For this, I am remorseful, and I am sorry," to the victim's family. The courtroom was filled with sadness as families shared their grief. Diego had simply been on his way to visit his loved ones. The pain of losing a child or sibling in such a senseless way is beyond words. It's even harder when the person responsible was once trusted to serve and protect. The next case shows how power and rage can ignite something deadly. Michael Dotro used his training, his knowledge, and gasoline.
The sentence to be imposed in this particular case is because Mr. Dotro, through his conduct and his admissions, spanning from 1998 to this year, represents the worst that we can possibly expect from someone in our society.
Michael Dotro, a police officer, harbored deep resentment towards his superior deputy chief, Mark Anderco. He was frustrated by the chief's decision to rearrange his shift times and order him to undergo an evaluation with a clinical psychologist, following the 11th excessive force complaint against him. In retaliation, Michael Dotro decided to take matters into his own hands. Late at night, as Mark Anderco and his family slept peacefully in their home, Michael Dotro carried out a chilling act of violence. Michael intentionally firebombed Mark's home, causing extensive damage to the property. Miraculously, everyone managed to escape alive, narrowly avoiding what could have been a tragic loss of life. Michael Dotro was arrested and taken into custody, facing an array of criminal charges. He had been accused of cyberbullying a woman who worked in the police department, slashing her tires, using the department's computer to access information illegally, and possessing marijuana and paraphernalia in his police bag. Furthermore, it was discovered that Michael had prohibited weapons in his possession, including a blackjack and brass knuckles. The prosecutor at Michael Dotro's trial delivered a powerful opening statement, calling the defendant's actions a disgrace to the oath he took as a police officer. According to the prosecution, during the hearing, Michael showed no remorse and offered no apology to his former superior, Mark Anderco, whose entire family was victimized. During the sentencing hearing, the judge handed down a stringent punishment. Michael was sentenced to 20 years for attempted murder and 10 years in prison for aggravated arson. Additionally, he received 10 years for official misconduct, 5 years for conspiracy to tamper with a witness, and 18 months for conspiracy to retaliate. These sentences were to be served consecutively, meaning Michael would first serve 17 years before being eligible for parole. Additionally, Michael was ordered to serve 5 years probation upon his release. One day in his sentencing hearing, Michael's wife made a shocking statement to the courtroom. She referred to Michael as a manipulative monster before a sheriff officer instructed her to be quiet. When it comes to dirty cops, there is no doubt Michael Dotro is one of the worst of the worst. While he never killed anyone, the same can't be said about Jeffrey Moreland.
Several people took the stand today, including Kara Jo Roberts' husband and the detective who described to the jury the red flags that he knew pointed to murder.
On November 5, 2008, Kara Jo Roberts, a happily married woman with 2 children, was discovered fatally shot in her home. The scene was gruesome, as Kara had been assaulted before her murder. Her killer had meticulously planned the killing, leaving Kara's body in the bathtub with the water running. An investigation into Kara's murder was swiftly launched, but the case soon became a cold one. The police, fearing there was a serial killer stalking the streets, grew concerned that the person who murdered Kara would strike again. Their fears were justified as 2 years later, in October 2010, another heinous crime occurred. In October 2010, Paige Huser went to check on her 75-year-old mother, Nina Whitley, after not hearing from her for a while. When Paige entered her mother's home, she found Nina dead at the bottom of the stairs. Initially, Paige believed that her mother must have died from a heart attack and accidentally fallen down the stairs. However, upon the arrival of the police and upon turning Nina's body over, it was evident that her death was not of natural causes. Nina had sustained several stab wounds to her chest, and there were indications that she had been assaulted. Police officers began canvassing the neighborhood where Nina lived, seeking any clues or witness accounts that might help them identify the killer. One resident who had seen a white male in his 50s walking with a limp and driving a black Jeep near Nina's house on the day of her murder provided valuable information to the police. This witness was able to give a detailed description of the man, which assisted the police sketch artist in creating a likeness of the suspect. DNA evidence recovered from Nina's body was sent to the crime lab for analysis. Although detectives failed to find a suspect, the DNA did match the DNA found at the crime scene of Kara Jo Roberts in 2008. Initially, Nina's daughter, Paige, did not recognize the suspect in the composite sketch. However, one day, while passing by a billboard displaying the police sketch, Paige's recognition hit her. The person depicted in the sketch was none other than her former boyfriend, Jeffrey Moreland. Paige and Jeffrey dated for 3 years after meeting in a criminal justice course in college, but their relationship ended in 1987. Since their breakup, Jeffrey pursued a career in law enforcement. He became a police officer and eventually retired in 2005. The detectives quickly realized the significance of Paige's revelation and began investigating Jeffrey Moreland as a suspect in Nina's murder. One of the key discoveries they made was that Jeffrey owned a black Jeep, the same color as the vehicle driven by the suspect at the time of the crime. This evidence further solidified their suspicions and prompted them to seek a DNA sample from Jeffrey himself. Jeffrey seemed reluctant to provide a DNA sample, delaying the request from the detectives. However, as the investigation progressed, Jeffrey found himself facing allegations of sexual assault. This turn of events provided an opportunity for the detectives to obtain Jeffrey's DNA through other means. Once the DNA was analyzed, it was found to match the unknown male DNA found at both Nina Whitney's and Kara Jo Roberts' crime scenes. This development strengthened the case against Jeffrey Moreland, as it provided a direct link between him and both the murders. Jeffrey Moreland was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder and sexual assault. He faced trial and was ultimately found guilty on all counts. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although it is clear Jeffrey Moreland is a police officer and a cold-blooded murderer, the next case isn't quite so clear-cut. Is former California Highway Patrol officer Tamika Johnson a victim of domestic violence or a callous murderer?
That CHP officer is behind bars, charged with murdering her husband.
Tamika Johnson, a California Highway Patrol officer, found herself in a tragic situation in February 2009 when she shot and killed her husband, Marcus Lemons, while on a freeway exit ramp. After the shooting, Tamika drove to her parents' home with Marcus's body in the front seat of her car. When questioned by detectives, Tamika provided them with a detailed account of what led to the incident. According to Tamika, she and her husband started their night out at TGI Fridays, but an argument soon erupted. Tamika stated that she took the car keys and started to drive home, attempting to ignore the escalating tensions between her and Marcus. However, Marcus became enraged when she ignored him, grabbing her neck. Tamika claimed she pulled over on the freeway, hoping to calm down and defuse the situation. However, the struggle continued as Marcus took the keys out of the ignition, and a fight over Tamika's purse ensued. Tamika believed that Marcus was going for the gun she carried in her bag, and in self-defense, she managed to get hold of the weapon and shoot Marcus. However, after a thorough investigation, the detectives came to the conclusion that Tamika's story was not one of self-defense. Instead, they suspected it was cold-blooded murder. 2 years after her husband's death, Tamika Johnson was arrested and charged with murder. She pleaded not guilty and was held on a $2 million bail as she awaited trial. Due to her arrest, Tamika was placed on administrative leave without pay from her position as a California Highway Patrol officer. During Tamika's trial, her defense attorneys attempted to present her as a victim of domestic violence, not as someone who committed a callous act of murder. However, the prosecution countered these claims by presenting evidence that Tamika had exhibited aggressive tendencies and a tendency to drink excessively. Additionally, the prosecution painted the victim, Marcus, as a kind and peaceful man. Tamika took the witness stand to testify in her defense, but her statements did little to sway the jury. The jury ultimately found her guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing her to 50 years to life in prison. After the verdict was read, Tamika slid out of her chair behind the defense table and onto the floor. She was handcuffed to a gurney rail by her left wrist and removed from the courtroom as her family wailed and sobbed. Tamika Johnson's case of domestic turmoil and deadly violence shocked many, but the next story takes us to one of the most infamous serial predators in history. For years, he was a ghost, a phantom that haunted California, leaving a trail of terror, violence, and unanswered questions. Joseph James DeAngelo Jr., better known as the Golden State Killer, committed at least 13 murders and 50 across California between 1974 and 1986. His crimes went unsolved for decades, becoming one of America's most notorious cold cases. DeAngelo's reign of terror began in the mid-1970s in Visalia, California. Known then as the Visalia Ransacker, he would break into homes, vandalize personal property, and steal small items. But his crimes quickly escalated. By 1976, he had moved to the Sacramento area, where he became known as the East Area. His modus operandi was chilling. He would stalk his victims, often entering their homes beforehand to unlock windows or plant ligatures. Then, in the dead of night, he would strike. DeAngelo would wake his victims with a flashlight beam and threats of violence. He often tied up male victims and stacked dishes on their backs, warning them that if he heard the dishes fall, he'd kill everyone in the house. He would then violate the female victims, sometimes repeatedly, over hours.
He preyed on people in Carmichael, Citrus Heights, and Rancho Cordova, often targeting couples. While raping the women, he would psychologically torture their husbands, tying them up and placing dishes on their back, threatening them not to move.
As fear gripped Sacramento, DeAngelo's attacks became bolder. He began targeting couples using the same tactics of binding, threats, and assaults. In 1978, he committed his first known murders, killing Brian and Katie Maggiore in Rancho Cordova. DeAngelo then moved his hunting grounds south to the Santa Barbara area, where he became known as the original Night Stalker. Here, his violence escalated further. He murdered at least 8 more people between 1979 and 1986, including couples in their homes. One of his most brutal attacks occurred in 1980 when he murdered Charlene and Lyman Smith in their Ventura County home. Charlene was violated before both were bludgeoned to death with a fireplace log. For years, investigators didn't connect these crimes. The East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were thought to be separate offenders. It wasn't until DNA testing in 2001 that authorities realized they were dealing with a single perpetrator. The case went cold for decades. DeAngelo, a former police officer, seemed to vanish into thin air after 1986. Victims lived in fear, never knowing if their attacker would return. Families of the murdered were left without closure, their loved ones' cases unsolved. Then, in 2018, a breakthrough came. Investigators used DNA from a crime scene and uploaded it to a genealogy website. This led them to distant relatives of the killer. Through painstaking work, they narrowed their search and finally identified Joseph DeAngelo as their suspect.
A breakthrough in 2018. Law enforcement plugged DNA material taken from a crime scene into a website called GEDmatch, which compares the genealogical data of family members.
On April 24, 2018, DeAngelo was arrested in his home in Citrus Heights, California. The man who had eluded capture for over 40 years was finally in custody. DNA evidence conclusively linked him to multiple crime scenes.
On April 24, 2018, police arrested Joseph James DeAngelo.
The arrest sent shockwaves through California and the true crime community. The Golden State Killer, a boogeyman who had haunted the state for decades, now had a face, a name, and a backstory that seemed jarringly ordinary. As details of DeAngelo's life emerged, the contrast was stark. He had worked as a police officer in Exeter and Auburn, California during the 1970s. He had been married, raised 3 daughters, and lived a seemingly normal life in the same area he had once terrorized. But on August 21, 2020, the day of reckoning finally arrived. DeAngelo, now a 74-year-old man, stood in a makeshift courtroom in Sacramento State University's ballroom, converted due to the COVID-19 precautions. The air was thick with tension as survivors and family members of his victims gathered to witness justice being served. As the proceedings began, the weight of D'Angelo's crimes became evident. Prosecutor Tien Ho painted a chilling picture of the man before them.
His monikers reflect the sweeping geographical impact of his crimes. The Visalia ransacker, the East Area rapist, the original Night Stalker, and the Golden State Killer.
But it was the victims' impact statements that truly brought home the horror of D'Angelo's actions. For 3 days, survivors and family members took the stand, their voices trembling with emotion as they recounted their experiences. One survivor, Chris Pedretti, who was violated by D'Angelo when she was just 15, looked him in the eye and declared,
"I was a normal 15-year-old kid. I loved going to school, having sleepovers, and going to church."
Another victim, Patty Cosper, daughter of survivor Patricia Murphy, read a statement on her mother's behalf. "May he rot in hell," Cosper spat, her voice filled with decades of pain and anger. As the statements continued, a pattern emerged. D'Angelo's victims weren't just recounting their trauma, they were reclaiming their power. Each statement seemed to chip away at the monster's facade, revealing the coward beneath. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Judge Michael Bowman prepared to deliver the sentence. The courtroom held its breath. Would the punishment fit the crime? Could any sentence truly bring justice after so many years? Judge Bowman's voice rang out, clear and firm.
Another way to state the sentence is as follows. Mr. D'Angelo is sentenced to a total of 11 life without the possibility of parole sentences, plus an additional life sentence, plus an additional 8 years.
The reaction was immediate. A collective exhale swept through the room, followed by muffled sobs and whispers. Some victims clasped hands, others nodded solemnly. The monster who had haunted their nightmares for so long was finally caged. But the most surprising reaction came from D'Angelo himself. The man who had terrorized so many, who had eluded capture for decades, now sat slumped in his wheelchair. As the judge read out his crimes, D'Angelo's face remained impassive, almost bored. It was a stark contrast to the predator he once was. Then, in a move that stunned the courtroom, D'Angelo slowly rose from his wheelchair. He turned to face the gallery, his eyes scanning the faces of those he had hurt. For a moment, it seemed like he might finally show remorse, offer an explanation, or beg for forgiveness. Instead, in a barely audible voice, he uttered just 5 words.
"I've listened to all your statements, each one of them, and I'm truly sorry."
The reaction was mixed. Some saw it as a final insult, a half-hearted apology that couldn't begin to make up for the pain he'd caused. Others felt a sense of closure, finally hearing the killer acknowledge his crimes, even if only briefly. As D'Angelo was wheeled out of the courtroom to begin his life sentence, the atmosphere shifted. The monster was gone, but his legacy of pain remained. Yet there was also a sense of triumph. The survivors had faced their tormentor and emerged victorious. In the days following the sentencing, reactions continued to pour in. Law enforcement officials who had worked tirelessly on the case for years expressed relief and satisfaction. Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert called it the most prolific serial predator in California history, emphasizing the significance of the conviction. But perhaps the most poignant reactions came from the survivors themselves. Many spoke of a weight being lifted, of finally being able to close a chapter that had been left open for far too long.
No 13-year-old should have to find out what a rape kit is.
It had been all over the local news about the man they called the Visalia ransacker, who was breaking into people's houses, going through underwear drawers, and taking items of no value. I could never imagine that the man who had been stalking me and peering in my bedroom window during the previous months would end up changing my life forever.
He ate from my refrigerator and he drank 2 beers, while I lay bound and blindfolded, unclothed and freezing on the hardwood floor in front of an open door in the cold March night.
Joseph D'Angelo's decades-long reign of terror left countless lives shattered. Next, David Carrick, a name that once commanded respect, now sends shivers down spines. For 2 decades, this Metropolitan Police officer led a double life.
This is the allegation that's been made to us, okay, sir?
There's no necessity.
Yes, there is.
So I've been a police officer for 20 years.
And in many ways, this is a story of the strength of 12 women. When this arrest made the news in 2021, those impacted started to come forward.
By day, he wore a badge. By night, he was a predator, His story is a stark reminder that monsters can hide in plain sight, even behind a uniform. Carrick joined the Met Police in 2001 after a stint in the Army. He seemed like the perfect candidate, disciplined, dedicated, and eager to serve. Little did anyone know, this was the beginning of a reign of terror that would span nearly 2 decades. His first known offense dates back to 2003. Over the next 17 years, Carrick would go on to commit a series of horrific crimes against at least 12 women. His methods were consistent and cruel. He'd meet women on dating apps or in bars, using his status as a police officer to gain their trust. One victim recalled how Carrick bragged about guarding Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Another remembered him showing off his warrant card on their first date. These weren't just pickup lines. They were calculated moves to lower his victims' defenses. Once alone with his victims, Carrick's true nature emerged. He'd become controlling and violent. Women reported being locked in small cupboards under the stairs for hours. Some were urinated on, beaten, and assaulted. One victim was attacked with an adult toy so violently she had to seek medical attention. Carrick's crimes weren't limited to physical abuse. He employed psychological tactics too. He'd tell his victims they were worthless, that no one would believe them over a police officer. He isolated them from friends and family, controlled their finances, and monitored their movements. In one particularly harrowing incident, Carrick held a gun to a woman's head. The message was clear. He had the power of life and death over her. Despite the severity and frequency of his crimes, Carrick managed to evade justice for years. How? The answer lies in a toxic mix of institutional failings and the power of the badge he carried. Between 2000 and 2021, Carrick was the subject of multiple complaints. There were accusations of domestic violence, harassment, and assault. Yet, time and again, he faced no serious consequences. Internal investigations were dropped. Criminal complaints didn't make it to court.
He was accused of harassing an ex-partner. No action was taken. Over the next 6 years, he raped several women.
In 2021, everything changed. A woman came forward with an allegation against Carrick. This time, the complaint stuck. As news of his arrest spread, more victims found the courage to speak out. The floodgates opened, and the true extent of Carrick's crimes began to emerge. The investigation that followed uncovered a pattern of behavior so shocking it sent shockwaves through the entire Metropolitan Police Force. Detectives pieced together a timeline of abuse spanning nearly 2 decades. The sheer scale of Carrick's offenses was staggering. As the case built against him, disturbing details about Carrick's personality came to light. Colleagues described him as cocky and a womanizer. He was known to brag about his sexual conquests, often in degrading terms. In retrospect, these were red flags that had been ignored for far too long. The investigation also revealed Carrick's fascination with weaponry. Beyond his service firearm, he owned a collection of legally held guns. This arsenal added an extra layer of intimidation to his interactions with victims. By the time the case reached court, the evidence against Carrick was overwhelming. DNA evidence, witness testimonies, and digital footprints all pointed to his guilt. The man who had hidden behind his badge for so long was finally exposed. Now let's rewind to January 2023. Carrick stands in the dock at London's Southwark Crown Court. The air is thick with tension. Victims, their families, and fellow officers pack the room. As the charges are read, gasps echo through the courtroom. Each count feels like a punch to the gut for those present. 49 charges, 24 rapes. Crimes spanning 17 years. Each detail is more horrifying than the last. Carrick used his position to gain trust, then shattered it in the worst ways possible. The courtroom listens in stunned silence as the prosecutor outlines a pattern of behavior so twisted, it's hard to comprehend. But how did he evade justice for so long? That's where this case gets even darker. Carrick's job as a firearms officer in an elite unit gave him a shield of authority. He wasn't just any cop. He was part of the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command. This prestigious position allowed him to brush off complaints and intimidate victims. As the prosecutor speaks, eyes dart between Carrick and the judge. The former officer stands motionless, his face a mask of indifference. But the courtroom? It's a powder keg of emotions. Anger, disgust, and a deep sense of betrayal fill the air. Victims' impact statements cut through the silence. Words like monster and pure evil hang in the air. One survivor describes feeling worthless. Another speaks of nightmares that never end. A third recounts how Carrick's actions destroyed her faith in the police, the very institution meant to protect her.
I don't trust the police anymore. My anxiety now affects all aspects of my life, and I struggle to go anywhere on my own.
What happened to me broke me. I was whipped, urinated on, and locked naked in a cupboard. I was told I was worthless and would be better off dead.
The weight of their pain is obvious. Some in the courtroom weep openly. Others clench their fists, barely containing their rage. The collective trauma in the room is overwhelming, a testament to the far-reaching impact of Carrick's crimes.
Before we begin, Alice's hands tremble. This is so hard for her, but she's clear about why she's sharing her story.
I didn't want to be known as a rape victim.
Then, a twist. Carrick's own lawyer paints a picture of a broken man, claiming childhood trauma led to his crimes. The courtroom bristles. Is this an explanation or an excuse? The defense argues that Carrick's upbringing in an abusive household warped his view of relationships. They point to his alcoholism and depression as mitigating factors. But for many, these arguments fall flat. The prosecution quickly counters, reminding the court of Carrick's calculated behavior. This wasn't a man out of control, they argue, but one who carefully selected his victims and used his position to silence them. As the judge prepares to deliver the sentence, the atmosphere shifts. This moment, years in the making, will determine if justice truly prevails. The words come like hammer blows.
This makes a total of 36 life sentences. The minimum term you will have to serve before the parole board can think of releasing you is 30 years, 239 days.
But the story doesn't end here. As Carrick is led away, whispers start. How many others like him are still out there? How deep does this problem go in the police force? The case has exposed serious flaws in the vetting process for police officers. Carrick had faced multiple complaints over the years, yet remained on the force. This revelation sends shockwaves through the criminal justice system. Calls for reform echo beyond the courtroom walls.
He was vetted again and passed. In 2019, he allegedly assaulted a woman in Hertfordshire. He got a mild reprimand and the matter was dropped.
In the days following the sentencing, public outrage grows. Protests erupt outside police stations. Demands for accountability reach fever pitch. The Met Police, already under scrutiny, faces a crisis of confidence.
We can't rely on the police to protect us from violence against women, which is one of the most prevalent crimes in our society.
Political leaders weigh in, promising investigations and changes. But for many, these words ring hollow. The damage to public trust is deep and may take years to repair.
All I can say is, I'm sorry that we've let you down.
The media frenzy surrounding the case brings other victims forward. Women who had stayed silent, fearing they wouldn't be believed, now find the courage to speak out. It becomes clear that Carrick's case, as horrifying as it is, might just be the tip of the iceberg. Support groups for victims of police abuse see a surge in calls. Mental health professionals warn of the long-lasting impact on not just Carrick's direct victims, but on public perception of law enforcement as a whole. Legal experts begin to re-examine old cases, looking for signs of similar abuse of power. The ripple effects of Carrick's crimes spread far and wide, touching every corner of the criminal justice system. As the dust settles, attention turns to prevention. How can we stop another David Carrick? Proposals range from enhanced psychological screening for officers to independent oversight committees. But implementing these changes proves challenging, met with resistance from some within the police force itself. The case also sparks a broader conversation about power dynamics and consent. Schools and universities update their curricula, emphasizing the importance of healthy relationships and recognizing abuse. While the sentencing brings some closure, the road to healing stretches out before them. Support services scramble to meet the increased demand, highlighting the need for long-term care for survivors of sexual assault. In the aftermath of the trial, a new normal emerges. Citizens eye their local police with newfound suspicion. Officers report feeling under constant scrutiny, their every action questioned. The trust between law enforcement and the public, once taken for granted, now hangs by a thread. These deadly cops shattered public trust and took innocent lives. In court, their lack of remorse was chilling. Their actions show that when power is misused, justice must be swift and unwavering.